What is up, my friends? Welcome back to the Sober Fix podcast channel, where we refuse to let addiction win. We talk about hard drugs, we talk about sobriety, we talk about alcohol, we talk about conquering all those painful things that we go through in addiction, living to tell the story and going on to spread our experience, spread our hope, and try and tell people, look, man, you suffer from what I suffer from, you can do what I did to recover. It's possible. We got a great episode on today. We got Patty Hayes, and she wrote a book, Wine, Sex, Suicide, My Near-Death Divorce. She gets all into that divorce, how it almost really just broke her, and how she regained her strength and continued on. She's got 8 years of sobriety. She's got a ton of knowledge. She got multiple books. I'm going to put them in the episode details. Thank you guys for your support. We're almost at 1,000 subscribers. Let's get into it. Hey guys, what's going on? We're back. It's Drew, another episode of the Sober Fix podcast, and I've got a great guest on today. We got Patty Hayes. She is a coach. She's an author, multiple books, really cool background. Patty, thanks for taking the time to come on here. She's also a mental health advocate, which you guys know I'm always talking about, and I feel like we can't talk about it enough because there's a long period of time where I feel like people that were struggling with stuff, they just didn't know, it wasn't as easy to just talk about in the open and say, hey, look, I'm suffering right now and I need help, or I'm depressed, or I'm down and out because of things that have been going on in my life. But I feel like we're starting to make a turn. I feel like we talk about addiction a lot more. We talk about mental health stuff, and it's all good things. So Patty, how you doing today? Thank you so much for coming on here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing excellent and very grateful to be doing that well.
Yeah, right. I mean,
Right.
we can look back on some times where I think both of us probably weren't doing so well. So it's a good thing. I love sobriety. I want to kind of start at the beginning for you. Where did you? I know you just told me before we started, but where did you grow up? Where are you from, and where are you at now?
I grew up in Connecticut in a little town called Stamford. It was like 45 minutes from Manhattan. And I moved then to Los Angeles to pursue my dream of working in the film industry. So I worked as a production assistant on some movies. And then after my marriage ended, I couldn't afford to keep my home. And I moved to San Luis Obispo, which is like Central Coast, halfway between LA and San Francisco. It's just like a perfect place. Then in 2019, I moved to Panama, the country of Panama, and that's where I am now. I live in a little mountain town called El Valle de Anton, and it's a extinct caldera of a volcano. It's one of only two inhabited craters in the planet.
Wow,
So, yeah.
that's that's scary and cool stuff. I want to ask you, how'd you land in Panama? How'd you come to that choice?
I knew I wanted to leave the US, and it was mostly driven by financial circumstances, after the divorce and things had changed. And I was really assessing the quality of life that I wanted to have as I was getting older. I was 55 when I moved. I'm 61 now. So at 55 or 54, I was thinking, how do I want this next chapter of my life? What do I want it to look like? Do I want to have 3 roommates? No, not really. Do I want to have 3 jobs? No. I like time freedom. I like having, my autonomy to make my own schedule. And so I went on some exploratory trips to different countries doing volunteer work. And then I bought an RV because I thought maybe RV living would be a cool thing, lower cost. That was an easy no. I had like every problem known to man in my RV. But when I was in Florida, I started seeing Panama because I think, I was close geographically. And then I made a trip, and it just kind of felt like home. Yeah, it just like felt comfortable, felt like home. So then I made one more trip to make sure I wasn't crazy. And then I moved July of 2019.
That's a big move. You're probably like, "Oh, am I doing this?" And you and you just went for it. I'm glad that, that ended up working out, and that's cool too that you kinda realize, "Look, I don't wanna have a bunch of roommates, and I wanna have a better quality of life and be able to afford more and have more time," like you mentioned, time is key, so good for you. I wanna kind of ask you, how long have you been sober now?
8 years. Yeah, 8 years. September 29th was my sobriety date. That was actually I was adopted at birth, and September 29th was my biological mother's birthday. And at the time when I got sober, it was like coming up in a week or two. So I selected that date just kind of to honor her memory, basically. Um, and then, yeah, that was the date that I quit.
Years is I mean, I'm just over 5, and I can't believe it sometimes. Sometimes I just go, "Wow." I tried so hard to get to that first year. That was what I really wanted. I just wanna get to that 1 year, and since then, time has just kind of flown by, it seems like, since then, but it's been amazing. How does it feel being 8 years sober? Is it surreal? Is it just full of gratitude? What's it like being 8 years sober today?
Definitely grateful. Um, I'm a really big fan of having a gratitude practice. It was something that I started right after like my marriage imploded and all this chaos, and I just felt like I was spinning out of control. Um, and I knew that I could get through a divorce, right? But I had no idea how. I also had no idea how wrecked I was gonna be emotionally. But I did start a gratitude practice, and then, just with things that happened, like, during, that time when I was really abusing alcohol, kind of on, like, a a death wish, um, I'm just so grateful. I think about I'm also just grateful to be alive. That's not lost on me. Um, and when I think about how different my life would be if I were still drinking, like if I were still drinking, who knows if I would have even lived to be able to move to Panama. But if I was drinking in Panama, I could see how horribly disastrous that would be. I probably would have gotten kicked out of the country for something, you know? I mean, I got kicked out of a club in Las Vegas for smoking pot on like one of the big floors. All my friends and I, we were all smoking pot, but like I get caught, you know?
You were the only one.
Yeah.
Hey, when you get kicked out of somewhere in Vegas, that's you gotta try pretty hard to do that.
I know. I know.
That's
Yeah.
funny. I remember reading in your about me is it talked about kind of 2 different chapters of
Mm.
kinda drinking and addiction. I wanna kinda go to the first one. It sounded like you started drinking pretty early on. Is that right?
Yeah. Started I mean, I remember like going to the refrigerator where the Harvey's Bristol Cream Sherry was kept and, going in there on stealth mode and probably like 10 and 11 years old. And I think I would like visit that on occasion. And then when I was 12, I probably started really finding ways to get alcohol more frequently. My parents were fighting a lot. There was a lot of stress and conflict in the home. And my brother had gotten arrested for dealing drugs. And so there was a lot of chaos and he got sent away. And like at this, no, then this other thing happened later, but like there was just a lot of like chaos, stress, emotional things that a 12-year-old you're not equipped to deal with. And my parents were too enmeshed in their own, fighting. Um, so I found alcohol, made me feel better. Um, and I had my first like alcohol poisoning when I was 14. That landed me in the hospital. Um, and that was just a mess. But again, like my parents were, they were kind of, I guess they were like, this is a different time too, right? This was like in the late or in the 70s. Um, and after I got out of the hospital, there was no follow up with anything. There was no like program. There was no therapy. There was no support. There was no kind of assistance. Um, and so I really abused alcohol and and any drug I could get my hands on till I was 19. And bad stuff would happen. Um, Crazy shit would happen. Like this one time, I think I was 16 or 17, and this boyfriend and I traveled into New York to go to see Simon and Garfunkel at Central Park. So, of course, to me, that meant like, drink as much as you can and find drugs from anyone, and, it'll be great. Yeah. And we were in the subway, down in the subway platform. There was a group of us, and we realized we were on the wrong side. Everybody else went up and over to get to the other side. In my infinite wisdom, in my drunken state, I jumped down into the tracks. I had no idea about the third rail. Like I literally could have been executed within a second. And then, crossed over that and got back out. And then, as if that wasn't bad enough, um, I always had a propensity to wander. Like I was always in search of like a better experience, or who could I meet that, just interesting people or other drugs maybe, that might be available. And I got found some kind of edible drug, and the next thing I remember was waking up in the back of a car, and these two guys had found me passed out in Central Park, carried me through the park to a hospital, had my stomach pumped, and they were driving me, back to Connecticut. And what did I do when I got to Connecticut? After walking almost on the third rail, after having my stomach pumped, I went to the bar. Like, that's insanity. But it was so normal back then. Like, of course, well, I'm all good now, brushed off, like got my stomach pumped. I can have a cocktail, you know?
Oh,
It's
I could so relate to that. I remember, see, because when I was in the middle of it, it's almost like these consequences that would happen to me. As long as I made it through them, it was almost like, oh, I would forget about it. Like the second I made it through it, it's like, I'm good. We made it through that. We can go on. And I even had a stomach pumped situation when I was, I believe, 17 or 18, and it was the same exact thing. The second my friends brought me back, I had good friends back then. They took me to the hospital, got my stomach pumped, took too many pills, took a mixture of pills. They realized that something was up. They took me in. It was the same exact thing. I walked out of the hospital. They took me home, and I was right back at it the second I got back. And I just had to say that because I'm listening to you talk. You just brought me back to that. It's like it was scary those days, though. I want to ask you, like, for you, was it almost like you just didn't know what was going to happen? Like you start off, you're drinking, you end up meeting people, you're doing drugs and stuff. Was it just a wild card as to like where you would end up all the time? Because that's how I felt like it was for me. I just never really knew what the night was going to bring. I guess like unpredictability. Was it like that for you?
absolutely. And I think as a teenager, I wanted that unpredictability because I was searching for an escape. It was really like, let me check out because the emotions are too much to deal with. And, I'm addicted now to how, this substance or, the drugs make me feel. Um, and I think I kind of liked that aspect of the, um, the randomness, maybe I was kind of looking for someone to save me or rescue me in some way, right? I think that was kind of a theme through my young adult years. And then also when I got older and got married, there were interesting mirrors that happened, like with my drinking patterns, that were pretty much the same. Um, but it's also interesting, like, to think about. I had a lot of friends that drank and did drugs the same way that I did. You know, um, it's weird to think about that. Like, how did we even get access to all the booze? You know, how were we getting access to all these, pills or pot or, you know, Coke or whatever it was? And then, like, where were the parents? My parents were just really checked out. There was a guy, I think I was like, I think I was 14 or 15, and I was living with my dad. And my dad, I think this was after their divorce, and I think my dad just wanted to be my friend. He didn't want me to hate him. And so he would kind of turn a blind eye. He actually bought me a keg for my 15th birthday to have at the beach, unsupervised.
Oh, wow.
That's not great parenting, right? Like that's like should have maybe not made that decision. But so I think I was like 14 or 15, and there was this guy who had a van painted with the band Rush. You remember that band?
Yeah, I've heard Rush before. Yeah.
So he had like the van was just totally tricked out with Rush and like carpet inside and bongs and all this paraphernalia. And he always looked stoned. I mean, he was like permanently stoned. And I just casually said to my dad, like, yeah, I'm going out with my friend, and he's like, well, let me meet this young man. And I'm like, what? Like thinking as soon as he lays eyes on him, there's no way he's gonna let me go. He did. He let me go partying, with this guy in his van, and the guy was like 4 years older than me, so he was like 17 or 18. I'm 14 or 15. You know.
Wow. Yeah, you
Yeah.
started early. I'll ask you, how did you get sober the first time? Did things kind of how did you decide to get sober? Because I know you were still young when you got sober the first time, right?
Yeah. The first time I was 19, and so all the things would happen, right? Like, it's not just like a couple things here and there, right? It would be like bad things happen, blackouts, um, but the final straw was I took my dad's car into the city, and um, I lost the car. I blacked out at a club. I lost the friend that I was with because I wanted to go search for adventure. I ended up in some guy's apartment in a different borough. I don't even know how we got there. And then, woke up in the morning, like running down a street. I had no idea where I was. This is before cell phones. I've got my high heels from being at the club, the night before. I'm in tears. And it was so clear, like, this is not normal. This is a problem. And at that point, I think my dad, intervened a little bit and looked into AA. And I did go to AA when I was 19. And it kind of stuck, immediately, because there were a lot of other young people where I lived. There were young people's meetings, and there was a lot of camaraderie and community, and I could have some socializing. But it was definitely challenging because I was cocktail waitressing at a bar. That was my job. And the owner was a cokehead. And so, we were always doing coke at, at the bar. And that's a challenging environment to be in, right? But as addicts, we kind of gravitate toward those things that are gonna give us the supply, that we want.
Yeah.
Um, and so I managed to stay sober while cocktail waitressing, but I'd had to, stop cocktail waitressing and, get a different job. But I started feeling better, and people would comment on like my eyes looked brighter, my skin looked healthier. It was amazing. Those mornings, like those mornings of feeling healthy were just such a blessing, such a gift. Um, and I did continue with the program for probably a couple years, and then I trailed off because I felt like I was in a good place in my life. I wasn't depressed, I was in my early 20s. Life was good. I had planned to move out to California. And so it just then kind of became a way of life. Like sobriety was just my way of life. And I had a good spiritual practice. I had a fair amount of self-awareness, I think. Um, and then I was sober for 16 years.
Oh, 16 years from the first time, huh?
Yep,
Wow.
I know. Yeah.
And is that when you met your ex-husband now?
I stayed sober through meeting him and, living together. And it was probably 5 or 6 years into the relationship. My dad had died. And I knew in my mind the moment, the choice, the decision that I was making was bad, but I did it anyway. And I convinced myself because we were taking a trip to Europe, and I just convinced myself like to have a little bit of sherry because we were somewhere and there was like a little bottle of sherry in the hotel room. And I was able to be like a social drinker for a couple of years. But I was tortured mentally and emotionally because every single time that I would drink, it was that was the only thing on my mind. Like, I want to drink this whole glass, but I'm going to pretend that I can just be a social drinker and drink half of it, and leave the rest. But then as the marriage started to deteriorate, like as the relationship started to get a bit like toxic dynamics and there was a lot of criticism, so I had emotional pain and I was already drinking socially, then it became the same thing that it was when I was a teenager, the elixir to numb the pain. Um, and then the two of us had very toxic alcohol abuse for a couple of years. And then when the marriage ended, I was in like full on self-destruction mode. Um, yeah, it was really bad.
Yeah, and as you're kind of, I've heard so many people where it's kind of the same thing where they're sober for a while and they start to feel a lot better and they're not depressed and they're, hey, this is great. And they stop doing some of the stuff that they've been doing to stay sober. And it's always a drink, like, when they're on a trip, it seems like. I hear that a lot. We had a guest on, Tamika, and she explained how one time she went to Mexico, and she was out there, and it's like, sun's out, everything's great, life's good, and, "Hey, maybe I could have that one drink," and, so that's so interesting that you bring that up because I feel like sometimes it's just that small thought of, "Hey, I just kinda feel like having this one beer. I'm on vacation. It's no big deal. Life's good. Everything's gonna be fine." But I also wanna touch on, when you were talking about taking a drink, but trying to, like, drink like a normal drinker and physically, man, when you were talking about that, I was just picturing, because 'cause I've done that before. There was periods of time where maybe I had, like, a work function or something, really behave myself. Most times I couldn't, but there was times where I really had to watch what I was doing, and you just you talked about it perfectly. It's like we can have maybe that one drink, but we're going to spend the rest of the night thinking about drinking more. And it's kind of so that was so interesting. I just wanted to comment on that. I like how you explain that because I think there's that kind of shows the difference between a lot of us, the normal drinkers and the alcoholics. Is like they could have one drink and they're fine. We have one drink and we're thinking about just wishing
Yes.
that we could have the other ones. But
Yeah. I actually asked in a Reddit thread, I asked that question, like, because I really feel like there aren't that many social normal drinkers. And I was curious, like, what do you guys think? And they were like, "Yeah, no, I have friends that like they won't even finish a drink at the bar." And I'm like, "What?" Like what? That's insanity. Like, you have to finish that one and order the next one as soon as possible. Um, but the mental space that it takes up, um, like all the stuff that goes into before you're going to go out, right? Um, and sometimes purposefully not eating so that, like, all right, good. I'm going to get my buzz on a little better because I'm going out hungry, my stomach's empty. I'm going to get a really good buzz, priming yourself to, to have like the best blackout,
the best one.
um, but yeah, that the mental space, like it's like a fixation, you know? I mean, yeah, I just remember that. It's such a seductive alcohol in particular, I think is like it's so seductive. They market it like it's, you're with your friends at the beach having beer. You're in wine country with your partner, clinking glasses at sunrise or sunset, not sunrise. Or maybe you do drink through the night and end up at sunrise. But um, I worked in wine country. I know that people are not just like tasting and sipping wine. They're there to get trashed, you
Yeah,
know?
it's like I always had this idea of what I wanted my drinking to be. I always, I'm gonna go out, I'm gonna hang out with friends. It's gonna be this glorious night where I just drink the perfect amount and everything's good. And like you just mentioned, it's like the things that I wanted to happen with drinking and then what actually transpired were two completely different things. Because
Yeah.
I just always overdid it, but,
Yeah.
I wanna
I
kind of
could
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say I could occasionally, just keep it at like, "Oh, I did it. I just had the 2, glasses of wine. I feel good. This is awesome." And like when I lived in San Luis Obispo, this was after the divorce, and I was still drinking, but it had tapered. Like the really like hardcore self abuse was probably a good year and a half, maybe 2 years. And then I did start like at least trying to, taper it a little bit, like as I had my new life in this new town. But I went to work in wine country conveniently, right? Um, and I started tracking on my calendar how many times I had unintended, consequences, um, or, consequences from drinking. And in my mind, it was only like once or twice a month, but the calendar told me it was easily once or twice a week that I was over drinking and having, bad things happen. I was in that pattern again, and it was tormenting me because like I knew the alcohol was a problem. I knew I don't drink like a normal person. I was trying to build this new life, but I still had all this emotional pain from that. Trying to heal, trying to deal with emotions, but then also numbing them out and just, trying to create a new life and working in wine country and drinking wine, you know. But um there was a night where a bartender took my keys and I was like 45 minutes away from my home. And so I had to like take a taxi, back home. and I'd left my keys to my house with the, I guess with the bartender or with the car. I don't know what happened, but I had to like break into the house. It was cold. You know, I was like, I don't know how old I was at that point, like my late 40s, I think. And then I got a DUI. It was well earned. But that was eye opening. I had to do um, community service and go to these classes. I didn't quit drinking, but I definitely stopped drinking and driving. Um, so, and then after that, because I was able to kind of taper back on that drinking after the DUI. And I think at this point also like my emotional healing was, getting better and further along. Eventually there was an event that I went to and I felt like shit about myself because I embarrassed myself during the event. And in the morning, I was like, I felt ashamed, I felt regret, I felt guilty, and I got pissed because I knew how much work I had done on myself to heal emotions, build my self-confidence, find my autonomy, rebuild a life, you know? I mean, it took a lot of freaking work. And I was finally like getting to a place where I was feeling proud of myself and good about myself. And then that feeling that morning was the deciding factor. I was like, if this liquid makes me feel this crappy about myself, it's not worth it. It has to go because I've done too much work on building my self respect and self esteem. And I'm not going to let that get in the way. And so that was the second um, sobriety, which
That's when you started
thankfully,
the second.
yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of people go through divorces and stuff and find themselves dealing with just a lot of those feelings, whether they're drinking or not even. But how did you start to make that bounce back? Where do people start? Let's say they've just gone through a divorce, they're hurting, they've got all this anger about the relationship. They don't know what they're gonna do with their life. How do they start to kind of gain control? What would your advice be on that?
For like the heartbreak healing,
Yeah.
um, I think it's really important to, well, first of all, I started like that gratitude practice, right? It was just something that I could focus on that like, okay, I have my health, I have a home, I have food, I have friends that care about me, even though like in your mind you say, nobody loves me, I'm alone in
Yeah.
the world, Um, and then learning to um, allow your emotions to happen and to identify them and to let them flow through you and release them. Being able to sit with that discomfort and that pain, which feels horrible and it feels scary, but that is the way to get through it. I tried to bypass it in a lot of different ways. Like, first, I tried to bypass it with like fake positivity. I'm good. I'm great. I'm going to take a year and be a whole new self. And, it's just going to be a new life. And no. um, and I think being like really intentional with things and having some kind of goals, like even if the goal is get out of bed and take a shower and allow yourself to feel good about doing that because you have to have something that you're working toward, right? So it could be and setting up a support system, letting people know exactly what you need from them. Some friends might be like, yep, we'll go for a walk together. Some people it's going to be like, hey, let's have a meal together. Some people might be like texting support, you know, the support part is really helpful because, when you go through a breakup, a divorce, your whole system of community and family and friends changes because the friends think it's contagious. Uh-oh, we're next, you know?
Oh,
Like,
interesting.
you know, everybody gets a little freaked out, like, whose side do we take? Who do we keep as our friend? It's hard, you know? So everybody just kinda disappears. And, for one partner, it's gonna be very alienating. And so having some support, and sometimes, like, you have to go outside of that immediate circle. Like, I got support from a cousin and, some other cousins actually. And then I found, like, there was some kind of in-person divorce support that I went to. Um, and that was helpful. I went to therapy. That was moderately helpful. Um, and getting in touch with like your values. And I think that's also important for people who want to quit drinking. What they want to find sobriety, but maybe they're like, I don't really know how, or why, or is getting in touch with their values. And you can find like values lists online, and they change throughout different times in our lives. Um, and if you pick 10 and then narrow them down to 5, and then have your choices be aligned with those values, right? Like one of my top values was time freedom. So when I was thinking about planning, my life going forward, that was a big thing. Like, okay, does this choice support the importance of time freedom for me? You know? Um, and at least it can give you like a little bit of an anchor at a time where you feel so untethered because you don't even know who you are anymore after a breakup, a divorce. It's like if, like my ex and I, we were together for 17 years and I was too dependent on him for my identity. It was kind of like that 1950s thing where it was like, you know, I just kind of made my identity as I was his partner. I didn't really have a lot of autonomy. So his criticism of me went, right to my heart. Um, and, I looked to him for approval and validation. And when I didn't get that, I just started feeling, really bad about myself. Um, so that's also important, like building yourself back up. And when you don't know who you are anymore, getting in touch with those values can be really important. And also, like, finding things to do that are similar to what you did maybe in the relationship. So, for example, like, I loved to cook for the two of us. Like, cooking was nurturing, it was loving, it was, how I contributed and felt like I was a good partner. And then, he's gone, there's no one to cook for. So I found a volunteer opportunity to cook or, just to like do like prep work. But that fed my soul, because it was something that I did that was in the marriage and that I can still be nurturing to people. Might not be to that person, that one person, but, I can still be loving. I can still be a kind person. I can still be nurturing. Then I had to learn to nurture myself. And I think a lot of this applies to getting sober too, right? When you're in a relationship with alcohol, that's a toxic relationship, and you can often have a love-hate relationship with it. You love it because it's your seductive partner, and then you hate it because of the abuse it gives you, you know?
Yeah, I loved it like the night I was drinking. I just hated it when I had to wake up in the morning. I want to ask you, so you get through the divorce and everything, and you're working on all the stuff you just mentioned, the applying these values in your life and kind of doing some of the same things like the cooking that you used to do in the marriage, but doing it, as volunteer stuff or for yourself now. And then you're sober now. You're on the second chapter, like you said in your About Me. How do you come to writing the books? How does that kind of develop? Writing the books about sobriety.
So I always wanted to be a writer from childhood. That was like a dream. I wanted to write a book, and I wanted to write a book that would help adults, because that time in my life when I was like 11 and all these like things were happening, I felt like it was a weird feeling. It's like I felt like I knew I had something I could offer, but I was too young at that time to be able to offer it. I was going through it, and I knew that it would be helpful to people. Um, and and then when the marriage like came to a really abrupt end, at a wedding, I, you know, grabbed his phone out of his hand because he was texting somebody, and I'm like, grabbed his phone, and then there's like the standoff, put your passcode in. No, I'm not going to put my passcode in. Blah 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 blah. And then he just said like, I'm done. I don't want to be married. I've been having affairs. So I left, and I was at the airport waiting for a flight, and a little voice said, pick up a pen. This is your book. Because I'd been like trying to be a writer in different capacities. Like when I moved out to LA after working as a production assistant, and then after my mom died, I started writing screenplays because I wanted to have like the emotion on the screen. I wanted to like have an impact on an audience of what they were experiencing as far as, a story that they were seeing. So I wrote these screenplays, and nothing ever came of it. And then I tried some other type of writing, I think. But it wasn't until, that moment in the airport and that first book that I published, it was in 2015. It's called Wine, Sex, and Suicide: My Near-Death Divorce. In fact, I have a copy of it right here.
Let's see it.
Um, and it was cathartic because it's a journal. So this was a journal of like the dark night of the soul. Um, and it was cathartic for me, to write that. It was hard to do, but I do think it has been valuable for people because it's bibliotherapy. They can identify and not feel so alone. That was like my main goal in sharing that story. I wanted people to not feel so alone in their pain. I felt just absolutely alone. I felt like trash. I just felt, like a worthless, I didn't even feel worthy of being a human being. Um, and so then like life went on, and I think I'd kind of had this dream, of being a writer, but after that first publishing experience, it didn't go the way I thought. You know, Hollywood wasn't knocking on the door saying, "Hey, Patty, we want to make your book into a movie." And, so I let things go. And then in the past year, I've really been picking up with writing workbooks and journals, and I have like a series of shadow work journals for healing heartbreak. And I also have a mindset book on easy ways to shift your mindset while you're just doing simple tasks daily, because every change that we make happens in the mind first. It's the thought, and then the thought goes to how we feel. So with all the exploration of like, topics, I was like, well, maybe I can write a book on, quitting drinking. I really didn't feel like I was qualified to do this, but I love my book. It's How to Quit Drinking Alcohol with Chat GPT. And I think this can be a game changer for people, because the reason I came up with the idea was that I was, feeling frustrated about my writing. And so I went to Chat GPT for a little pep talk. And I was astonished by what it came back with: support, clarity, vision, purpose, compliments. It was incredible because it remembered like every little harebrained idea that I put in, or, the creative ideation process. And so then I was thinking like, how and it just came to me like that those could be, together. Um, this is just, it could be an amazing tool. There's a custom GPT that I programmed for the 8-section personal profile. So all the, personal profile questions are in there. That makes the GPT, now this is with the paid version basically, it makes the GPT remember you. It remembers your history. It remembers the triggers that you have. It remembers what you've said, like how you want support. Do you want like lighthearted, support and, you know, a uh, a playlist of uplifting meditations or songs? Or, do you want like neuroscience or addiction therapy, um, you know, processes to have?
So crazy.
It is. It's
So cool.
amazing. And so, like, for people who are, you know, they want more anonymity than AA. Some people don't like that there's God in AA, or they don't want to go to a meeting, or they can't afford therapy. Or you're sober for 3 weeks and then you have like a little mini crisis at 11 o'clock at night. You're not going to call a friend. You might go online. There's communities, right? There's Reddit. Um, Maybe you go on TikTok or something, or Discord. Um, but you could go to your GPT coach, your sobriety coach, and like, hey, I'm struggling. I feel alone in the world. My friends are out drinking. I really want to be there too. And then just have like a little coaching session. And then you can plan, oh, I'm going to a wedding. I'm going to a work event. Like you were talking about work events. They can be really stressful if everybody's drinking, and because it can be on your phone, like everybody's on their phone all the time. Nobody's going to know. You could be chatting with your sobriety coach at a meeting. Um,
Yeah, it's so amazing. We were talking before we started, and I use it for different stuff related to the podcast and everything. And I remember when I was reading your about me, kind of it got me thinking about sobriety. And with the Chat GBT stuff, I was like, well, it's so interesting because I've asked it questions before, and I've just been I've been shocked by the stuff that comes back, and this idea that hey, it's 11 p.m. No one's answering the phone. I can't go to a meeting right now. I've already said a prayer, maybe if that's your thing, and you have a question, and you just want to hear something give you some support, whether it's AI or whatever. And I like that idea that that's another tool that someone could use in a crisis, and at the bare minimum it's going to get them at least to slow down a little bit and read
Absolutely.
and hear some of the advice, and maybe that's enough time to get them through that trigger. So it's so cool. I want to ask you, Patty, I know we're getting kind of towards the end here. One of the parts of your book was suicide, and for anyone listening, I've already asked Patty if it's okay to bring this up. This isn't a subject that I would just spring on someone as a guest, but I have a little bit of experience with it. I had two friends in addiction that ended their own life. One of them was at his grandmother's house. He was
Oh.
coming off of years of heroin. The other one, same thing, coming off of years of heroin, and it was at his parents' house. And I know that you have experience with that. Can you talk about that a little bit? Just kind of where you were at in your life, the things that you were going through.
Well, I'm sorry about your friends. Um, yeah, I'm definitely an open book about talking about suicide because I think for me, the uh, I think some people have like this misconception that, um, like my therapist would ask me, this was after the divorce. So this was like when the marriage ended. I was suicidal as a teenager, but I didn't really have any um, intentional attempts. It was all just accidental. Possibly I could have died from doing things. Um, so my therapist would ask me, do you feel suicidal? And I would say no, because I legitimately really felt like I did not want to end my life. But what I realized was I could not live with the pain. And I had a lot of suicidal ideation. So if you recognize that within yourself or you recognize that with a friend, that's the time to reach out and get help. Things like, I want to go to sleep forever. I wish something would happen to me so I could just be gone. I don't think I'm strong enough to do this. I can't do this anymore. This is too much for me. Um, and then reckless behavior, um, and self-harming behavior. Um, those are signs of, suicidal ideation that are important to look for. And and you may not even recognize that in yourself, like I didn't. I was like, "No, I really don't wanna end my life." But that pain got to a level where the only way to end that pain was to end the physical being, the mental and emotional being, so that I could have peace. I just needed a break. I just needed peace because it was so painful, overwhelming, day in, day out, through the night, waking up crying. It was just too much. Um, and it was interesting actually, like being in the psychiatric hospital, how that in the psychiatric hospital, I felt seen. I felt connected to people because we were all there for the same reason. I didn't feel alone in the world. I was like, these are my peeps, you know, we're in pain. We were people in freaking pain and we survived. And now we got to figure our shit out, you know? Um, but being in there, I felt connected to people and developed even greater compassion, for people and for myself. We definitely have to have that self-compassion. We're so hard on ourselves, you know, we're so judgmental, so hard on ourselves. We're our own worst critics. Um, and I also think like for anyone who, is feeling like that pain is too overwhelming, I know it's hard to reach out because you think like, "Oh my god, they're just gonna lock me up somewhere," you know? But there are there are helplines that you can reach out to that they're not gonna call the police. You can text helplines, um, and there are probably even apps. I know that there's apps for a lot of different mental health, um, things, support now, and so I'm sure there's gotta be an app that would help for suicidal thoughts, um, or just at least like reaching out to a trusted friend. It's very hard to do because you just feel like something's going to happen to you that's out of your control, right? But it's important to do that to reach out. That's hard. This is the whole suicide thing is really hard because you're isolating, you're alienating. You don't see how you can go on in that state. I didn't believe that things were gonna change. I really thought I was gonna be in that permanent state of pain, and that was unbearable.
Yeah, that's such a great point too, and thank you for talking about that and sharing your experience on it, Patty. I want to ask you. You mentioned kind of the how when a lot of us when we get sober, we just have a lot of shame, we have a lot of regret, we have kind of that inner critic and we kind of look back on a lot of the mistakes that we made while drinking. For me, it was like I used to look back on destroyed relationships, or I'd look back on all the time that I spent like locked up for things I did while I was drinking, for selling drugs and all that kind of stuff. Just a lot of shame and guilt and stuff like that. How did you start to let that go? Because I know, and I get a lot of comments about this as well, where people are saying, "Hey, I'm sober, but I just feel so terrible about all the years I spent in addiction." What kind of helped you move past that and kind of let go of a lot of that guilt?
Finding a way toward self-compassion and self-acceptance, and then eventually self-love. I'd say start with self-like first
I've
before
never
getting
heard that
to,
before.
yeah, start with self-like before you get into the heavy stuff of self-love. But the compassion and kindness, um, if you can like activate that part of the inner dialogue, like if those, feelings of shame come up, um, or, go to Chat GPT and ask like, hey, I'm feeling ashamed about, all the shit I did when I was drinking. Help me through this. And that'll be an amazing tool. It'll give you exercises to do, mental exercises, emotional release techniques. Um, but yeah, finding your way to that self-compassion um, is key. It's essential. And then I think also like building self-respect, I think is also something that's really crucial to do. But I think that probably has to come after, you can't feel ashamed of yourself and have self-respect. Those two are just like oil and water. They're not going to go together. And so little by little, you work through these emotional things. When you identify it, right? Like when you identify that feeling, um, you can then comfort yourself. You have to find a way to bring that comfort to yourself, bring that, compassionate, loving, and kind self talk, right? Be your own coach or be your own parent, be your own best friend. Think about, how you would talk to a best friend if they were telling you, like, I feel like crap. I'm a horrible person. I wasted time. I did this, I did that. I hurt that person. You know, we need to find a way to let that go. Learn the lessons from those things, but not hold on to like the punishing. There's no reason to punish ourselves. You know, people make bad choices and bad decisions all the time, and some people don't learn from them. At least, we're trying, we're learning. It might take a few times, you know, but keep trying because there's a way forward for everyone. And it's not maybe the same way forward for everyone, right? We have our own unique individual journeys through this. But I really believe that so much of healing just comes from emotions, emotional awareness, being tuned in to like, okay, how am I feeling? Oh, that feels weird. What just kind of came through my mind? Let me just sit with that for a minute. Where did it come from? How can I release it? Maybe I need a walk or, you know, just sit outside in nature for a minute or do some journaling or just some self-reflection or just having open space in the mind, right? Just let me sit here and not try and think about something. Let me release ruminating. Let me just breathe, you know?
Yeah, such great advice. You named so many different things, Patty. I appreciate you coming on. I'll ask one last question. This is for those that have been sober 5 to 10 years, and because we ask a lot of questions geared towards those that are just starting off, and I'll ask this geared towards the woman or man that has because you're at 8 years right now, and how do you keep your recovery fresh, sobriety fresh? How do you what helps you kind of not get too complacent and get to the point where you're like, oh, I've healed, I don't need to do any healthy things for myself anymore? Like, how do you keep that drive to continue to want to stay sober today?
I think it was um, from my experience of breaking the sobriety that I had for 16 years. So I did that once. I tried to tell myself like, I can have a drink or two. I could be a social drinker. I know for a fact that I cannot. I don't want to try that. So I think that's one thing. But also I am in that place where like sobriety is my life. but I was there before too, right? So, there is always that chance, like, I don't know, is it going to be so sneaky and come back again? And am I going to forget that I, had that experience already of going back and trying it? Um, I don't think I will, because I do believe that I've, learned from that, and I feel so much stronger in my sense of self now than I ever have in my life. Um, that I just don't think that would be an option. Um, but you take it day by day, right? You make healthy choices, healthy things for your mind, body, and spirit each day. Kind of, going through like an assessment. How am I doing? How, all systems go, things are good, and not letting things build up, because I think it's when we let those things build up that then we can start having like that stinking thinking, you know?
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. I know that as someone that's, struggled with alcoholism addiction, I know that I could always go back out. I know that, but I just don't want to. And so I think what it is I have like and you kind of alluded to this a little bit. I have just a healthy fear of it. Like I
Mhm.
know that I'm never fully cured. There's some things that I'm gonna have to do to maintain this mental health, to feel content and stuff.
Mhm.
But yeah, I'm the same way. But I know it's possible because I've done it before. Never had this much time and
Yes.
gone out, but I've done it before. So, Patty, thank you so much for taking the time to come on here. You covered a lot of really cool, a lot of cool topics and support for other people. So I appreciate it. Thank you for everything, Patty.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you for watching the whole episode. I would love if you guys liked, comment, share, subscribe. And if you want to come on and tell your story, the Sober Fix Podcast at gmail.com. Let's go another week, guys.